Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now, here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the Bioptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And boy, oh boy, we got a really action-packed one today, something that's really near and dear to my heart. We're going to be talking about some elements around regenerative farming, the evolution of natural products industry, and the state of the soil and agriculture. This was a topic that got introduced to me originally by my mom, and I can remember in high school she was into what was then considered novel amongst her local community in a very rural place in Canada called organic farming. And we used to actually tease her and make fun of her, as did some of her neighbors, about not using chemical agents and using regenerative soil elements. And we produced extraordinary amounts of food, better and above than their friends and neighbors. And eventually she started to gather influence. And now, 40, oh God, yeah, more than that, almost 45 years removed from when she introduced me to that concept, it's now caught a trend that is creating such a buzzword, and particularly amongst youth and younger people who are now mindful of this. Of course, with social media and podcast and all of these elements, we have a plethora of access points that were kind of choked off in the past. And I think that's why we're seeing this resurgence. Plus the development of all these weird conditions, genetic mutations, unusual sicknesses that didn't exist in populations past. And many of the OGs, many of the biggest influencers in the industry were raising the alarm 20, 30, 40 years ago. And now that it's come full circle, as their points of contention have now been validated. And there's even sifting up into federal governments, agencies, state governments, and we're seeing a plethora of interest. And today's guest is Dr. Jeffrey Burke, who happens to be one of the OGs inside of this industry. He's worked with the greats. He'll probably give you a little... we were talking before the podcast about, some of the people that he's worked with, people that I consider the legends of the industry. And so let's give a little background on Dr. Jeffrey today. He has been a key figure in the natural health products industry for over 4 decades. He's worked with every level of the industry, from management and product formulation to research and development. Currently, Dr. Burke serves as the Director of Education for Kokora Life, a regenerative company focused on growing, formulating, and manufacturing certified organic and certified regenerative products. Prior to his work with Kokora Life, Jeff had a storied career in radio hosting, a 42-year running national radio talk show. And after concluding his radio career, Jeff launched his new podcast, Honest Health with Jeffrey Burke, where he continues his tradition of interviewing experts in the natural products industry. And he joins us from Las Vegas today, or just outside of Las Vegas, I guess. And hey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Your reputation precedes you, my friend.
Thank you. Well, let's talk about maybe a little bit about your background. We touched on it a little bit prior to the podcast, and maybe for the listeners' benefit, you can share with you your journey in this whole process in the natural health products industry, and why, when most people are retiring, you're expanding your career and your outreach, and going into the new media, which is podcasts, which is now, you guys got like Tucker Carlson has moved into this, and the biggest influencers in the world are on podcast. and it provides a level of independence, clarity, a robust level of topics that are relative to the population today. So, Dr. Jeffrey, can you give us a little background of your history of how you got into regenerative farming and agriculture and why this is such a hot topic right now?
Well, I went to the University of Michigan, and I always thought that I wanted to be a doctor. And during college, I started working part-time in a little health food store and got the bug. I moved out to Los Angeles after college, and I started working with Dr. Earl Mandel, one of our definite leaders in the industry back in the late 70s, early 80s. And he had a chain of stores, about 170 stores, and I found myself at the helm of those stores as a 20-year-old, not knowing exactly what I was doing. And he took me to one of his radio shows and gave me the microphone, and I never gave it back. And I just fell in love with the industry. And over the years, I have been unbelievably heavenly blessed to work with the best of the best in our industry. I've seen every aspect of the industry, the changes in our delivery systems, the quality, the integrity, the discoveries, and how things were accepted, how they're accepted today, working with all these amazing people, launching hundreds of lines and seeing the quality control change in the industry over the years. And it has been absolutely just an incredible ride. And now I'm blessed to work with Rick Scalzo. People may know Rick. He was the man who founded Gaia Herbs, and now has a agricultural farm in Costa Rica, where we grow certified organic and certified regenerative herbs. And his new line is called Kokora. And I travel around the country and I educate and train and lecture, and people on all levels, as well as doctors and hospitals as well. And it's amazing that you can do something this long and still absolutely love it. And I see my friends retiring, and I can't even imagine.
I think that's a big aspect of the longevity element is when you put your hands in the dirt, so to speak, and really get intimately connected with food quality, the growth. For example, I was just down at Paul Check's farm recently. He's got 13 acres up in Fallbrook, California. And he's kind of one of the legends, living legends today, and maybe one of the most integrated health persons that I'm, in contact with. And it's fascinating what happens when people are exposed to this. I had the benefit of getting exposed to this as a young man with my mom's garden, and all of her interest around that, because she was smart enough to see what was going on and to create an environment for me, which gave me a foundation to understand, hey, wait a second, when I went to university, the food didn't taste the same as when I was home. It didn't feel the same. It didn't interact with my body the same. That too spawned me into the health industry and why I've worked at all these different levels. And it becomes fascinating how it comes full circle. And yesterday I was taking a walk with my son and my wife, and my son is just over a year old, and he was picking a little, fruit off one of the trees on our walk down to the beach. And, it's a sour tasting fruit or whatever, and he's peeling it and he's putting the sour fruit and he loves it. And it was just so, such a reminder for me to go, wow, you know what? Like, how many people actually know how their food's grown and what's put on it? And of course, there's a very big misidentification of what USDA organics actually is. There's all sorts of, when you're buying organic, it just means less chemicals than non-organic. And I think that's really the differentiation point between what's qualified from a representative element of organic for food versus regenerative food. I think that's a big distinction. So maybe from your experience, could you maybe illustrate the evolution of awareness that's beginning to happen and you're on the forefront of why we went to the organic classification, and then how we're moving into beyond organic classification into regenerative farming? I think that'd be a good start.
Yeah, and also to your point, I grew up with my grandmother, and we used to go foraging for mushrooms and asparagus. She used to get dandelion tea, and I think she had the first pot on her stove of perpetual bone broth that she just kept adding chicken and onions and garlic to. So she was Ukrainian and Polish, and you went to her house. Every time you came to her house, you got a cup of bone broth. So you kind of learned a little bit of the medicinal myself as well. That was the early bug. So, but to your point, I remember when organic was exciting. I think I was about 17, 18, and I lived in the country in the Midwest before I moved out to the West Coast. And I used to love to go to the farms and spend time on my uncle's farms. And, they didn't use any chemicals on their farms. So we were kind of around the wholesome kind of farming way back then. And then all of a sudden we started seeing organic in the stores. And if you would bite into it and everything tasted so good, and you had that wonderful feeling that you weren't eating anything that had chemicals or herbicides on them at that point in time. And it was interesting, but as the years have gone by, the decades have gone by, today you may not have the degree of chemicals on your organic produce, if you will. But the thing is, there's absolutely no taste in your vegetables and fruits today, because somewhere along the line, the most important part of that agricultural process, which is supporting the host, the soil, and doing something with it and giving back to the soil, we didn't do. So regenerative, it's interesting because it took about 15 years for organic to really start being a trigger word into the 80s, early 90s. And regenerative, it's been a couple years now, and it's already becoming a big focus. And a lot of younger people are very much on the bandwagon. A lot of the 20 to 30-year-olds are very much trying to be involved in movements. Things like Kiss the Ground, they're doing amazing work. So I think it's been amazing. And I think that regenerative is kind of going back in time and maybe helping to bring things up to the status quo. Because if we do not do something about our soil, there's going to be hell to pay, basically. I just read some new stats the other day that says we have about 58 to 60 crops left on the planet due to the over-tilling and then the blowing away of the dirt into the lakes and the ponds and the ocean and the rivers. And that over 40% of our insect populations are gone, and over 50% of our bird populations are gone. And they're blaming on that on over-tilling and herbicides and pesticides. So we have to remember, we have to do something. This is just no longer just a good idea. It is something that we have to make sure we're doing because, with Rick, he's working with other countries now, like El Salvador and these other countries that are starting to become regenerative. They really want to be part of the movement, so he's giving them counsel so we can start to get this ball rolling. Because, one thing people forget about regenerative agriculture is that it's not just about the cover crops. It's not just about the no-tilling. It's also about the capturing and the grabbing and bringing the carbon down into the environment, down into the soil, and helping to control and capture that carbon and bring it back down. And on the big scale, help to reduce global warming, which is something that we probably all hear about every single day. So I think it's become essential. I think it's become something that we have to focus on. I think we missed the boat along the way, focusing on organic rather than what was not in or on our crops, and we ignored the soil, and I don't think we can ignore it anymore.
I'm always, every time I hear this, I go back to a Living Color comedy script with Jim Carrey. And I always say the truth is funny, and people can Google this. Maybe we'll put it in the show notes. There's a really funny episode where he's portraying the character of Jay the Juice Man, who is like towing in he starts off where he's towing in a Winnebago with his teeth, and he's talking about juicing everything, and he goes, it's in the soil, and he's putting the soil in the blender and everything else, and it's a really funny skit. But underneath that, it was a really illustrative way to kind of bring to people's awareness that, yes, what is essential for us to access the vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients to create the strength and hardiness of plants actually comes from the soil. That plants use things like fulvic and humic acid to convert inorganic minerals into the organic bioavailable minerals that make not only our food taste good, but make food literally our medicine, which is something Hippocrates the father of medicine, identified 2,500 years ago. And of course, the caduceus is still used as Hippocrates as one of the symbols of the medical industry. But somewhere along the way, particularly in the last 100 years or so, the health industry or health advocacy has been about medical care, pharmaceutical intervention, centralized agricultural boards in order to meet the food demands of a growing population. Many of that had great intentions, but as the great Thomas Sowell, one of the great philosophers in America today, says, all of the worst things that happened in life have happened by really smart people with good intentions that put in strategies implemented from a federal or centralized level that don't work in the real world. So there's, as he says, there are no solutions in life and trade-offs. And so the trade-offs of commercialization and the rapid growth and industrialization and all the wonderful technology, the trade-off was the diminishing value of the quality of food. So to give you our listeners an example, if you were to take an orange from the 1950s and compare it to an orange today, you would need about 50 plus of the oranges today to make up the nutrient content. And when people are looking at, food charts, or they're looking at the content of food, many of the examples that are being used on your information panel or being advocated in dictionaries or resource pages about what the content of that food is doesn't actually match to what you're buying at your local store. Now, unfortunately, so many people have been living in this world, they've never actually had food from an organically grown regenerative soil thing. I can tell you without question, any single person that I can take that will go and have food from one of these places, the same food that you're eating, and you go and have something from a regenerative farm, the taste, the satiety factor, the literal feeling that you have from the food is significantly different. And so what we do is we have millions of years of evolutionary biology telling us what's right for us. And yet we've had this oversight or this proclamation of value that when you put it apples to apples, so to speak, doesn't match up. And I can see why you're so passionate at this stage, because number one, you have the life force and the availability because of the food and the diet and the understanding of this and what you're selecting for food. So this is awesome. So explain maybe the nuances between regenerative farming and why you kind of illustrated why that's so important from, the environmental aspect, etc. But what does it mean to the actual products that you're producing, whether that's a food stuff or say something for an herb or something that we would use for a vitamin?
Okay, thank you. The difference between, let's say, if we're going to go head to head between organic and regenerative, organic is really about what's not in or on the crop. It's about the herbicides, the GMOs, and of course the chemicals. Regenerative, obviously you still follow the organic methods because you don't use any chemicals. But the difference is with a traditional chemical farm, they throw the chemicals on, they do a ton of tilling. Organic farms, they don't use any herbicides or chemicals, but they still till the property. And with regenerative, it's about holding in place the crust of the earth, holding it in solid, but also not leaving dirt exposed areas to the environment, which means cover crops. So like on the farm in Costa Rica, they may grow turmeric and then grow mucuna or ashwagandha in between, so that you're not having all these little clear pathways, you're getting a complete green belt. With that green belt, it actually draws down the carbon into the environment to the soil to feed and nourish the roots, that nourishes the plant, that nourishes the crop. But something that's different, something they do different down in the Costa Rica farm, is they create kind of this microbiome, M&M mountain organism, kind of like a natural ferment tea. People might call it liquid mulch, but it's actually amazing. They go out into the forest and they collect ground cover like moss and mushrooms and bark and trees and leaves, and they bring everything back and then they chop it up and they mix semolina with it. Then they mix molasses and eggshells and coffee grounds, and they mix it all together and they put it in these 25-gallon bags and they put it in a 200-gallon water container. After a couple weeks, it forms huge amounts of bioferment, like huge probiotic microbacteria. And what they do is they use that as their fertilizer. The Costa Ricans like to call it emi, and they nourish everything with it. And there's no chemicals there. They also create something called biochar, where they're burning bamboo and they're getting the remnants of that. It's dark, and they mix it in the soil, and it actually, the condensation makes a bamboo vinegar that they actually pour back into the soil. So the soil is not only just astounding for rebuilding and renourishing, but it's also there to build heavy duty, solid kind of foundations to the soil for the root control. Since they've been doing that, the worm counts have grown dramatically, hundreds and hundreds of worms per cubic foot, where before they were just doing certified organic, there was only a handful of the worms. Now, worms are amazing because they become part of the soil. When they die, they become more part of the soil. They aerate the soil. They open up the soil so there's root areas that kind of are able, so the roots can grow very deep. And it's all part of the process of the regenerative. You're restoring a microbiome. You're building hugely nutritive value. When you take a crop and you cut it, or you take it out of the ground like a tuber, like an ashwagandha root or a turmeric root, you are taking something out of the ground that already is 4 or 5 times stronger than just a traditional crop on a regular farm. And then you freeze dry it. Of course, you isolate it, you extract it. By the time it goes into a supplement, it's like so much stronger than people are used to, but that's what the soil can do for us. And I learned that Rick's first year on the farm, he grew turmeric organically, certified organic procedure, and he had a wonderful crop. The next year, he transitioned into regenerative, and the crop was 5 times larger. So it not only gives you quality, but it gives you quantity. So as we start to establish more of these regenerative foundation agricultural farms, start moving the organics up to the regenerative level, and we can come back for the Monsanto farms later. But as we do this, we're building more food, and there's better quantity of food and more money for the farmers, and they're offering something that's more nutritive. So there's some really great benefits to regenerative for long term, and it's not just about this crop. It's about as many more crops as we can do moving forward. And if we stop tilling, we'll have more topsoil. So
this is it reminds me, I was in 2 separate conversations. One was with an Ayurvedic farmer who was using regenerative for elements based on the original Ayurvedic practices, and that was at a conference in India. And he was often chastised by the group because at the public education things, all these individuals were talking about Ayurvedic medicine and stuff. And he goes, well, you're talking Ayurvedic stuff, but you're not actually looking at the original text. And to your point, he was saying most of the crops that they were using were only getting their roots down 2 to 3 feet. But in the Ayurvedic text, they needed to be like at 6 feet deep. And in order to do that, you do need these organisms like the bacteria, like the mycelium that's present, and then also the worms and these type of organisms that literally till the underneath of the land to make it easier for the roots to actually proliferate and extract more value out of the soil. And this, even what was supposed experts in the field, he's like, yeah, well, you guys aren't really practicing Ayurvedic science. And he was on a mission to educate them about what the true Ayurvedic practices were. Of course, that was a 6,000-year-old process. And then another instance, I was in Okinawa, Japan, one of the longest living populations in the world, and there
Blue
I was.
Zones.
Yeah, and I was inspecting a turmeric farm that was run by a very benevolent Japanese person. And what was interesting is I learned at that point that there were actually 2 distinct crops of turmeric. There was a spring turmeric and a fall turmeric. One had, they were slightly different in color. The nutrient content was significantly different and had totally different, and they would mix both of those inside of their turmeric products, which gave it a much more robust aspects. And so these little nuances are so critical to really understanding regenerative farming today. Much of this knowledge has been lost, forgotten, or never even within the awareness level. And so I'm so excited about what you guys are doing and that you're educating the population to start considering that. And thank God for the internet that we can get access to this. So what do you feel is the mission? Going back to, you brought up something early in the conversation, and in that you said, hey, look, we don't have that much long left with the soil and the crops that we have available, and why this mission is so important to get this information out to people to start changing the patterns and habits. And we can illustrate rapid change relatively quickly. What do you see, how do you see that unfolding in the generations to come?
Well, first of all, I think the whole thing is to create interest and to create awareness. And being an educator for goodness, almost 50 years now, I've learned that nothing gets done in the world if people are still continually guessing without any sound foundations of information to work from. So what I like to do is, my whole thing is about teaching people and educating, because as a public, we are going to have to start, pressing our value systems and our demands forward to the farmers and the agriculturalists and all of the people that are wrapped up in the chemical-based society, that we're not going to buy the chemical-based products anymore. We want regenerative. We want certified organic, certified regenerative, and these are the products that we want. And we're like, look, we want to buy them. Give us what we want. We still will pay you, but give us what we want, because we're thinking about not only our own health and well-being, both physical and mental health, but we're also thinking about the health of the planet for our kids and our kids' kids. And I think that that's absolutely essential. And I think, to your point, about the density of the root systems and things, Rick uses something on the farm called a yeoman's plow, and it's really not a plow. It has shanks, and the shanks can actually pulsate and open up compacted areas in the soil without disrupting the topsoil. Because I couldn't believe that the ashwagandha roots were like this, and the turmeric roots were long. Because if you've ever seen like a ginseng, or you've seen some of these things where they grow solid and all of a sudden the root systems go off to the side, it's because they hit a compacted area of soil and the least resistance was going sideways. So by opening up the soil and having these worms, to your point, and having the bioferment and having this wonderful distribution and crop rotation, different nutrients, things that bring nitrogen into the soil and carbon in the soil, every time you rotate the crop, the ground is now ready. It's not naked, it's not barren. And I think I mentioned, we were talking before, there's a wonderful movie out called Kiss the Ground. And it is amazing. It's actually narrated by Woody Harrelson. It's a really good look at where we were, where we are, and where we need to be going with our soil. And they take these barren areas and they show you how they revitalize them. And it's quite an organization. I was very blessed to interview Evan Harrison, who's the CEO of the Kiss the Ground Foundation. And it was a wonderful interview. And he said something that was interesting. He said, with organic, I think I mentioned earlier, it takes a long time for people to really grab onto organic and start saying, okay, I'll try this stuff. But regenerative, and to your point, the younger generation, regenerative has taken hold early. I mean, very, very quickly. There's younger people. They're going into health food stores saying, do you have regenerative products? Do you have regenerative vegetables? They're looking for it. So I'm seeing these regenerative sections being set up in health food stores and vitamin stores and chains and mom and pops. And it's really kind of nice. But I mean, it's great that we're doing it, but we have to. It's not just something to do. It's an absolute necessity. And I think that the education part is where it's going to come into play. Like when people started walking in saying, I just want organic. We have to do the same thing now with regenerative.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip. Turn cultured foods into superfoods. Raw fermented foods like sauerkraut and low sugar live yogurt can be good for you, but rarely have enough of the right probiotic strains for therapeutic benefit. So here's a way that you can turn them into superfoods. What I do is I get some raw sauerkraut or a healthy yogurt. Ideally, it's grass-fed or coconut-based, and you can empty 3 caps of P3OM into a container and mix it up thoroughly. Leave it at room temperature for a couple of hours before putting it back into the fridge. And what's going to happen is these probiotic levels will be multiplied. In fact, it doubles every 20 minutes. And then what you're going to get is you're going to have a food with strong proteolytic activity. To learn more about P3OM and why its patented strains make it the strongest probiotic available, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
In line of that, so, I was talking to my mom the other day, and she was so delighted that there's so many young people moving into her small village, and they're setting up these regenerative farms.
Nice.
And here's one of the benefits of technology. So technology allows us to kind of exit the cities and work in local communities. And so what seems like an economic down pressure of living in cities and stuff, we can work from home, we can run our computers from home, and we can grow our food at home to offset the cost of food, which is scaling up exponentially high. Yeah. And then we can also create food that's healthier for us, and also teach children from a young age about what real food actually is. In light of your mission to kind of educate and inspire, what do you think would be the reasonable trajectory of education for someone? You start it with Kiss the Ground. If they want to get involved in regenerative farming, find out more about that, and maybe even go as far as getting their own regenerative farm or creating movements within their local area to support each other in this process, or bring awareness to their political and social leaders in their communities?
I think, first of all, they need to read everything they can get their hands on. There are some absolutely amazing books that are out there now on regenerative farming. And I love it that they actually do and kind of pose these books in a way where they're comparing it to chemical-based Monsanto farms, and then also comparing it to organic, which is kind of where we've had a lot of love for a long time, and we still do. But why this regenerative is necessary at this point. I think there's some amazing podcasts that are out there on regenerative. And I think one of the greatest things about podcasts versus 42 years on the radio, people used to have to wait because it was always live and they were always waiting at a certain time to sit there. Podcast has really given us this amazing way of proposing things that have been pre-recorded, so you can listen whenever you want. And some are still live, but a lot of them you can listen to when it's convenient, when you're driving, when you're having your downtime. And I think that has really been able to broaden the success of bringing messages to the public, is the ease of listening. Like with myself, I mean, my podcast is on like 12 platforms. Some people have their favorite platform. I mean, wherever you want to go. And people that want to kind of watch us and watch our interaction, they'll go to YouTube. They'll watch the video. So there's something there for everybody. But some people say, well, I only listen to Spotify. Fine, it's there. So we want to make sure that we have this variety and this flexibility, as well as making things as easy as for people to listen to. And so we've got the periodicals, we've got the books, we've got the movies. There's a couple movies on regenerative. There's the podcast. I think that is one of the best things, because we didn't have any of that when organic started. It was mostly word of mouth and very little written at that point. So we are leaps and bounds ahead out of necessity. Yeah. But also, it's okay, though, because now we have all these other little avenues and platforms we can utilize. But I think we're in a much better place today with regenerative as far as knowledge and education than we were 50 years ago with organic.
Yeah, one of the elements that I've thought about this for a long time, and I was like, how do we redefine what food is, and how do we validate regenerative farming from a nutrient perspective, as opposed to the current model, which is based on calories and often defunct, non-realistic representations of the nutrient content of food. We've gotten so into this calorie model that we really haven't got into the nutrient density model. And if you look at the most successful health advocates in the world, they're all talking about nutrient density. And the more nutrient dense foods that you eat, the easier it is to maintain a healthy weight, the easier it is to prevent, early disease or genetic mutations or all these other elements. Plus, in addition of removing all of the chemical agents that may be present on current food sources, which have an undetermined amount of, problems that can develop because of that, from a intoxication element of chemical intoxication or deficiency-based diseases. And I remember listening to an old book by an old audio tape. You might remember this, by Joel Wallach, called "Dead Doctors Don't Lie."
Don't lie. Yep.
And he was really big on this because he was both a doctor and a veterinarian. And he said, well, all of the diseases that we're getting all these treatments and pharmaceuticals and stuff, we're getting the same diseases with animals, and we're just feeding them vitamins and minerals. And I was like, wait a second. And so then he talked about the life expectancies of doctors versus the life expectancy of people on this. And he goes, it was like totally dramatically different. And I remember that having such a big impact on me as a young person, and got me really into validating minerals. But do we have any way to validate the nutrient density of food in regenerative farming other than the taste, touch, feel factor?
The problem we have is that between country and country, things are done so dramatically differently. If you have a gluten intolerance and you go to Italy, there's a good chance you're going to eat pasta and bread over there and have absolutely no reactions because of the way that the food is put together. If you do it here, the chemical-based foundations of our food is going to mess you up terribly, especially if you have celiac. I remember a couple months ago, they were talking about cereals, the same cereal that's made in the United States versus the same cereal that was made in Canada. And in Canada, all of the flavorings and the colorings were natural fruits and vegetables. And over in the United States, the same cereal was all chemical based. The problem is we allow it to be here, and the companies utilize the chemicals in the foods because it's cost effective. They're able to get better shelf life. Everything has loads of preservatives, and because really healthy food has a short shelf life, and they don't want that. They want long shelf life. So the thing is, I usually tell people, if you are eating food from the middle of your grocery store, pre-made, food that needs to be reconstituted, food that has things that you can't even pronounce on the label, that's where all the ill health is coming from, the middle of the grocery store. And I learned this a long time from, I think, probably Dr. Atkins. He used to tell people to shop the perimeter. We still talk about it today. Fruits and vegetables, protein, grains, and healthy dairy. He goes, if you do all your food from the outside walls, he goes, you're going to be healthy. I have some friends that went to live in Greece. They were there for a year. And they literally found that there was really not much transportation. They used to walk a quarter mile every day into town to get their vegetables, their fruits, their fish, and all that, and their olive oil. And they kind of adopted a Mediterranean diet. So they came back a year later, both of them like 80 pounds down, in shape, no more medications, looked fantastic, looked 20 years younger because of the environment and because of the mentality that was there. They came back. They were here about 5 months. They moved back. They said it was just, we fell right back into all the old patterns here, all the drive-throughs, all the ease of convenience and all that stuff. And they moved back. They said, so when they say location, 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 it is so true, because over there, the mindset is, why would you drive when it's only a quarter mile to walk to town to get your vegetables and your food? So they didn't know how to cook. They didn't know how to do any of that. By the time they left, they were having Mediterranean cooking classes at their house, teaching everybody, all the new people that were moving to that village. And it's amazing. But I think that's where it starts. You have to remember, if you can't pronounce it on a label, chances are it's not good for you.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the best foods in the world have no labels. If you put broccoli in a bag, it doesn't have a label that says broccoli. If you have chicken, or if you have fish, or you are using even tofu, and you're using a more vegan vegetarian diet, there's very rarely a lot of labels concerned there. So the labeling process and the proprietary blend labels that are out there, even in my industry, I am not an advocate of a proprietary label, because there's really no transparency of what's actually in individually itemized ingredients in the formula. So you never know how much you're getting of anything. So I've never been a big proprietary label person. And I think with food, I think the more food you eat that has no labels, that is something we can do today. We can start doing today and take control of that part of our diet. And then you have to decide what you can stick to. I mean, what is it that you can stick to? A Mediterranean diet, a high protein, low carb diet? I mean, is it keto for you? It has to be something that you can do for a minimum of 6 months to give your body a chance to adjust and readjust and find out if that's the road for you to follow. It may not be, but you have to give it a chance. I find that a Mediterranean diet, the way that the food is put together, the richness, the color on the plate, the oils, the combination of protein versus wonderful, healthier carbohydrates is probably one of the healthiest ways to go. And it's interesting how many cardiologists now are totally on board with a Mediterranean diet. They never were before, but they are now.
It reminds me, I have a friend of mine who's she's in the procurement business. She's been to about 180 countries to seek out all the different farms of where she's sourcing and everything. And she's from Turkey. And so she invited me over to Turkey a number of years ago, and I went over to Turkey. I was stunned by the quality of the food and the knowledge of even the local markets about these elements which were practiced for literally thousands of years in this regenerative knowledge that wasn't to public knowledge. But the food there was probably the best. And I asked her one day, I said, like, you've traveled all over the world. Who makes the best food? And she goes, well, actually, turns out I think it's from my home country in Turkey. Like I had to go to like every country in the world or almost every country in the world to find out, yeah, it's really good here. And if you look at what's fascinating too, if you look at the geography of Turkey, a lot of it's relatively harsh. And so in order to create farming that was able to produce, you had to use all of these regenerative practices in order to make the land. And then that just got passed on for generations. So the obstacle became the pathway, which I think is where we are right now. Where we are right now is we have a model that is shown to whatever the proposed benefits when it was implemented has proven that it's not sustainable. And people talk about sustainability, but I don't think they really understand what sustainability is. And when it comes to soil and regenerative farming, that's essentially what you're saying. This is something that we know that if we practice, not only does it produce better crops, better food, more nutrient content, and ideally better health, it also is supportive that can be done for a long term. And that's the message that I want to get across to people, is that no, there are consequences to choices, and ignorance is not bliss. The consequence of ignorance can be death, or certainly disease or dysfunction, or a less quality of life. So I always say, at Bioptimizers, we're on the pathway of a stronger, longer, better life by extending not just the length of life, but the quality of the life that we're living during the time that we've been allocated to be here. Anything else that you feel is really a point that you want to get across to our listeners today about this movement, regenerative farming, what you're doing over at Kokora, and what the whole mandate and mission is?
Well, I wanted to touch on one thing before. I have a friend of mine who has two aunts and an uncle that live outside Okinawa. And they're living in a blue zone, and they're all about 104 and older. And so he went over and he flew over and he sat down with them, and he asked them this question, and they said, why and how are you able to live this long? And they walk every day. They have no health problems of any kind. And they said, the problem is in America, everything has to be complicated, and you have to have a huge amount of diversity because people need everything to be so varied and so have such an amount of things to choose from. He goes, we eat very few things. We know what our diet is. It's all healthy food. He goes, we probably eat about 7 or 8 different foods, and we eat it every day, and we have complete control over the chain of command of growing and processing and cooking our food. And he said, we don't leave it to anyone else because that's how it gets messed up. He said, the problem is in America, people don't have any control over their food. They buy it at the store, they get what they get, or they base their diet on their cravings and on the things that they've created a habit for, not realizing that many of these companies, those chemicals actually create cravings to the point where it's almost like an addiction. So she said, that's really, really important. And then I have to tell you this. I was doing a lecture at an elementary school. A friend of mine said, will you come and talk to the kids about farming? I said, sure. So I'm talking, and the kids are probably 5, 6, 7. And we're talking, and I said, where does food come from? And the one little boy goes, the grocery store. And I said, okay. I said, where do they grow it? And he goes, in the back room. And I thought to myself, when did we dissociate from knowing some of these things? I mean, when I was a kid, our field trips were to like farms and things like that. I was blessed to live in the country, you know, and that kind of stuff. But they really felt solidly that that food was grown in the back room of the grocery store. So there's been a dissociation to not just food and what we should eat, but where it comes from and how it should come and what we should be doing to give us the best quality to eat.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. And again, putting your hands in the soil, actually getting that. And what's fascinating is children really respond so positively when they see that. They're excited to pull a carrot out of the ground. They're excited to get an apple off a tree. They're excited to see, to be involved intimately. And of course, if you go back to Ayurvedic medicine, they talk about the 5 electrical energies, and they eat with their hands because of the connection to the food. Now, if we look at the most popular foods in America today, they're finger foods. There are foods that you actually eat with your hands, that you actually touch the food, whether it's burgers, chips, hot dogs, pizza. Those are all hand foods, and that's what's most positive and creates the most problems. I'll touch people to listen to a book, because you mentioned something. It's Eric Schlosser's Fast Food Nation, where he talks about in the 1970s the advent, because the industry was carved up amongst a few big giants, and they were like, well, we can't, whatever we spend in advertising, we're just taking from each other. And so what do we need to do to get more of a market share is we need to create a set of chemicals that mimic nutrients that, number 2, reduce the satiety of food, and number 1, reduce satiety, and number 2, increases our biological tendencies to eat more of it, thinking that we're getting the vitamins and nutrients inside this. And that's got implemented across the industry since the 1970s. So, and that's when we started to see the scaling up of sizes of foods, and the biggies and the giants and all that sort of stuff. And so when you get ahead of that, I can recall going to my first time at a Mennonite farm. And at this Mennonite farm, they had been using regenerative seed from like 300 years or something like that. It was like forever. And I ate 1 tomato, and I was full from a tomato. And I could go buy organic tomatoes, and 1 tomato wouldn't fill me up. But I couldn't believe that the nutrient quality was so intense with this tomato that I ate 1 tomato and I felt completely full. That's the difference of eating nutrient density food. So where can people where do they find regenerative food, or how do they ask for it, or who do they take this message to if they're living in a commercial, in a city or a place that doesn't have a lot of this accessible, to start changing the direction of where we're going?
You're going to have to go through health food stores as of now, because it's not really, we're not seeing hardly any of it in traditional grocery stores as of yet. But the stores that actually have vegetables and fruits and organics and things like that, or regenerative as well, you're going to have to follow that route. So the places you go for your supplementation, if they also are food diversity stores as well, you'll be able to start seeing all different kinds of regenerative foods coming your way. It's right now at this point, because it took forever for organic to go from health food stores into mainstream grocery stores. And we will see it. And as fast as it's happening, maybe sooner than later. But right now you can pick up wonderful regenerative foods, and of course supplementation that is regenerative based. Of course, mushrooms that are certified organic, and herbal products that are either combination blend of certified organic and certified regenerative. And I tell people, when you're using supplementation that is certified regenerative, and there's like a 2 capsule a day dosage, start with 1. Yeah. Because of the fact that they are so much more potent, and there's a good chance you don't even need the full serving size to be able to get the benefit. And so I usually tell people low and slow. because I think low and slow is important. It gives you a chance to see how you react individually, because there is no one size fits all. There is no one box fits all. Everybody reacts differently, but it's easier to start on the low side and then escalate as you listen to your body if you need to at all. So it's cost saving, but it also is saving of wasted time and energy too.
Well, it's super powerful. We're coming up on the top of the hour, so I want to give the floor to you for our listeners to find out more, to get on board with your podcast and all your information, because I know we could talk for hours about all of the exciting developments in this field, and I want to give people a place, and maybe you can talk about Kokora or anything else that you feel warranted, where people can get more information, access you, and get on board for advocacy for this, I would say, this growing trend in the health industry.
I would say first light the fuse in the candle and request the movie Kiss the Ground. That is going to get the ball rolling in your court. You're going to have those stand back aha moments and some enlightening ideas that may come your way to kind of open the door. Number two, I'm interviewing Rick on my podcast, and he did amazing things for herbs in our industry, but we're doing deep dives on the podcast, one herb at a time. So you'll have a full podcast on one herb. At the end of that, it's kind of like a focused, like a little mini series. At the end of it, you will have a great understanding of some of the most popular herbs in our industry, but you'll also learn why regenerative can be a lot more potent. And we're also doing one on series on mushrooms as well. Mushrooms are a very hot commodity now. You can talk about turkey tail. We can talk about lion's mane, reishi, maitake. Learn a little bit about each one, give you a really solid foundation, because the stronger your foundation, the better choices you're going to make and the better mental tools you're going to have to make those decisions. Because today, with light staffs in a lot of stores, you may not have a one-on-one person going to a store. You have to have a little bit of the information yourself so you can compare labels and look at things and see which is going to be the most applicable for you. Number three, work on your patience. Things don't happen overnight. It takes a while for things to happen because we did not get in these messy, unhealthy situations yesterday. We've been progressively doing this, and we're in control of a lot of it. So we have to make sure that we give things time, be patient. All good, healthy things are well worth the wait. And the other thing is, keep in mind, make sure you listen to podcasts like this. Tune into mine, Honest Health with Jeffrey Burke. This is my logo. It looks like that. But listen to things that are interesting to you, and you may just find that you may become in your own right a disciple where you start talking to other people about this as well. Did you know about regenerative? It's amazing how those conversations start to happen over dinner or on car rides or at work at lunch and things like that. That's how this spreads. And I just think that the awareness is there. There's so many tools for you to read and learn and listen to today. And if you have questions, you can always reach out to me. I'm pretty easy to find. And Kokora, you can follow them on Instagram. You can follow them on LinkedIn and TikTok. The webpage is amazing. Rick is doing tons of videos on the products, but also on regenerative. And you'll learn he's got a wonderful melodic voice. So he kind of draws you in, and you walk away and you're educated. You don't even remember being educated. He's got an amazing voice. So it's about education. It's about taking advantage of the wonderful tools that we have at our fingertips today. And, we're sitting around playing on TikTok. That's fine. But why not listen to a podcast in the background and educate your brain while you're laughing at a TikTok? So never stop learning.
Dr. Jeffrey, this has been so informative. We'll put all the show links for our listeners at the end of the podcast so you can access these things easily. I want to thank you for joining us today on the Awesome Health Podcast. And for all our listeners, find out more about this information. Talk to your local farmers. Talk to your local natural health store. Get on board with this. This is your way of saving the planet, saving your health, and contributing to the generations to come by getting ahead of the curve, being an advocate. No one's going to take care of your health better than you. And it starts with your own advocacy, your own investigation. Start those conversations, ask questions, and get informed. That's how we change the world for a better place. I'm Wade T. Lightheart. This is the Awesome Health Podcast. Thank you from Bioptimizers, and we'll see you on the next episode.
The Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do, converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others is a total game changer. Suddenly you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's masszymes.com and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.